Like the astronauts, it's an automatic buy-in. They're going to do the ground control kind of, that's what's in the procedure. That's what they're being told. Whereas down on Earth, I don't know, but in the organizations I've worked with, like, you have to get that buy-in. Like, people have to respect you as a leader. You have to earn their trust.
When I was in the military, I spent a lot of time studying and being taught leadership. A good number of the classes I took at the Air Force Academy were about leadership. I went to 2 different month-long courses when I was in the Air Force, where we actually went away and learned about and practiced different leadership techniques. It was a lot. But despite all of that, when I left the military, I honestly felt completely lost in terms of leadership in the corporate world. Don't get me wrong, many of the lessons still applied, but for some reason, the language around leadership, it just didn't sit right in this new corporate environment. And I'm honestly still not sure why that was, which is why I'm so excited for the conversation today with Susan Charlesworth. Susan has worked with both the European Space Agency and the UK Space Agency to train actual astronauts on topics like human performance or human factors and then personal performance. She now runs her own coaching agency where she helps train organizations and individuals to develop the skills they need to perform under pressure. I recently met Susan in person for the first time when I was visiting London, and she shared with me that she had gone through a similar journey to mine, leaving kind of the more formal language that we often see in government leadership courses to something that feels a bit more natural. So I'm really excited for the conversation today. Before we get into that discussion, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening to the show, please make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. It's the beginning of 2026, and we have a lot of great stuff going on. If you are already subscribed, then I would humbly ask that you share this show with just one other person, because after all, that is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. So with that, let's get in the discussion with Susan Charlesworth. Susan, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very good. I think very different weather to what you've got there. It's pouring with rain outside and dark, but yeah, very good. Thank you.
It's funny you say that. We're in California, but it has been cold and dreary for a month, and we're getting ready to have this like weird atmospheric river from the northwest is going to come in, and we're supposed to get drenched with rain over the next few days. So it's probably not that different from you. I would love to start with a little bit more of your background. Your LinkedIn profile, it says you're an astronaut trainer. We talked a little bit about it in the intro. How did you start working with ESA, and what kind of work did you do there?
So I studied psychology. I studied psychology at high school and then went on to study it at university. But I actually always wanted to join the Royal Air Force in the UK and become a fighter pilot, but my eyesight wasn't good enough. So their careers advisors told me no. But instead, when I was still a teenager, so in the UK, we have the Air Training Corps, like air cadets for teenagers. So I joined that instead and absolutely loved it. Loved everything to do with aviation. I got my pilot's license when I was 17, my private pilot's license. And so, yeah, I used to go flying with my dad, which I loved. So I always had that love of aviation, but yeah, I started studying psychology at high school and absolutely loved that too, and went on to, as I said, study that at university. Went on to become a psychology teacher, but the aviation industry drew me back in, and so I got my master's in human factors and safety in aeronautics. And whilst I was at university, this job advert came up in their careers advisory saying they needed a human behaviour and performance specialist at the European Space Agency to train their astronauts and their mission control or ground control crew. And I was only 24, 25 at the time. And I saw that and I just thought, that is the coolest job ever. I will never get it, but, let's go for it. And I always I'm very thankful to that 25-year-old, very naive, very go-getter self. So, yeah, I applied for it. And they said, okay, 6 month probation. So yeah, I moved out. So the European Space Agency has lots of different locations across Europe, but the astronaut centre where I worked was in Cologne in Germany, or is in Cologne in Germany. So I moved out to Germany. And yeah, was there for about 5 or 6 years. So training the astronauts, ground control crew, the astronaut instructors, people that go to Antarctica for a year in what the European Space Agency and NASA, I believe, call human behavior and performance. So I don't know how much we want to get into this, but like it was different to when I went back recently and taught them like pure human factors. So yeah, human behavior and performance. So it was leadership that we've just mentioned, but teamwork,
Yep.
decision making, problem solving, communication, all that kind of good stuff. So
Well, let's take a second to split those out a little bit. So human performance, I guess let's start with where it sounds like they're at now, like human factors. Define that. That's a term I think you see a lot in the industry. For anybody who's not familiar, like what does that mean? What does the term human factors mean?
So, yeah, good question. I always say this is just a very layperson explanation, but like for
Yeah.
me, the human behavior and performance was very much about the people interacting and how they were behaving with each other. So as I said, like the leadership, the communication side, whereas human factors kind of obviously it's all on a spectrum, but it's kind of the side that's more humans behaving with the more technical. So when I was teaching them human factors, it was more kind of ergonomics and interfaces and yeah, how they're interacting with hardware and things. I know, human factors professionals, like they go across the board and specialize in different things. So but that's at least how I taught it at ESA. That was kind of the definition we had. It was two different courses, obviously interlinked, but it was more the people, the human behavior and the people and the performance, and then the kind of human factors and the interaction with the kind of physical technical things.
Got it. So kind of like the person to person versus the person to machine
Sure.
or person
Yeah,
to environment kind of differences.
exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Very
Well,
simply.
then let's. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah. These things. There's endless. Yeah. It's a fractal for everything like this. So then, since the focus of this show is much more on that human performance side, what did that look like? What were some of the things you discussed? And I think this will kind of get into what I mentioned in the intro of, how did you teach this? What were the frameworks that you used in this more formal setting? And then I think we can have that shift into like, what felt weird or what felt different or what are you doing differently now? But let's start with this idea of, what did human performance, human behavior, how was that taught kind of when you were there?
Yeah, so at ESA, we used ESA, NASA, I think the Japanese and Canadian space agencies, but don't quote me on that, all collaborated to create this human behavior and performance competency model. And I don't know about the rest of the team, but used it religiously. So on there, we've got the competencies and the behavioral markers for every one of those things we said. So for leadership, communication, teamwork. And under that were, I don't know, I've got it up here now, 15 sort of behavioral markers that they expected to see from their astronauts for each of those like competencies. So it was a very structured framework, as I said, down to the sort of the behavioral markers that they expected from the astronauts. So we used that to create the lessons, the case studies, the examples, the exercises. We also, as I said, then taught the instructors of the astronauts and the ground control an adapted version of that. But it was all based off this framework that the space agencies had created. So it was very structured. Okay. It was obviously based on a lot of research and a lot of experts that all collaborated on this framework. And it was very specific to the space environment and in particular going to the International Space Station. So
on that, could you give maybe an example of like what would be specific in, because this comes up a lot, and I'm sure you see this now, every company thinks they're different, every group thinks they're different. And then you kind of boil it down, just like, look, people are people and like there might be nuances, but like it's all the same. So I'm really interested that that this framework is so highly tailored to a particular type of person, a particular environment. What are
Well, as you said, we'll hopefully go on to this. You could use this framework for other people. I'm the same as you. One of my favorite quotes is "People are people." So you could absolutely. I think it was more the fact. So I can give some examples. So a behavioural marker of the leadership competencies is accepts leadership responsibilities. Another one is assigns tasks with clearly defined goals. Another one is maintains team cohesion in adverse and uncertain circumstances. So you could absolutely relate this to any organization or people. And that's certainly when I set up my company, as you said, 4 years ago, I certainly thought that I would therefore be doing exactly that and using these competencies in different environments and different organizations. And you certainly could. So it's not that there was anything kind of wrong or that didn't work with this framework. It was more kind of how my thinking kind of changed over the years from, you know, 15 years ago when I first started teaching this to in a very specific environment to what I'm doing now and the people I'm teaching now.
Okay, so when you say it was highly tailored, it's not necessarily the framework, but then like when you're teaching the classes, the case studies, the examples, those are what are then.
Yeah, and
okay,
it really,
that makes a lot of sense.
it was really specific. I mean, it was back in the days of like PowerPoint, not death by PowerPoint, but a lot of PowerPoint slides. And we were, making sure we hit every one of those behavioural markers. The astronauts and ground control also then after so the astronauts had 3 weeks of this. The ground control crew would have either 3 or 5 days of this, depending, where they were in the team. And then afterwards, they were expected to go and do all their technical training and display all these behaviours. And so one of my other tasks that I kind of started whilst I was there was to create an observation model as well. So using these behavioural markers, if you were in a simulation and the simulation director was, observing their ground control and qualifying them and that kind of stuff, they should be able to observe these behavioural markers as well. So it was really prescriptive. Yeah.
Was there follow-up then in that sense that they're watching them and then they get a report or they get a grade card or like, hey, we noticed you're a little low on this one or you need to think about how you're doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another thing actually that we taught them was how to debrief and give feedback. So that was another soft skill, human behaviour skill. We spent quite some time on how they would debrief these. Because again, like the simulation directors and the flight directors, as with all these things in technical industries, were excellent technically, but hadn't, got the kind of background that we might have, or, the psychology kind of theory and knowledge. So it was very much about teaching them the skill of debriefing these skills too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then, as we've kind of talked about, we were going to get, so then you thought that was what was going to happen. You were going to take this framework and then just apply it out in these other environments. Why didn't that work, or what happened when you tried to do that?
Yeah, so exactly. And I mean, I still work mainly with space companies. So more in the UK, it's about building satellites and Earth observation and things rather than astronauts. But as we keep saying, people are people. These behavioural markers, would work just as well. But kind of it started actually when I was at ESA. We would do the training and then people would come up to me afterwards and say, oh, they're having this really like specific problem, or they're having a conflict in their team, or something isn't working, etc., and could I help them? And I at the time didn't really feel qualified to do that, so I decided to do a coaching diploma whilst I was there. So I and that was much more obviously one-to-one. Much more. I mean, I really learned to listen and not talk. That was the number one skill. And so, it was much more like kind of one-to-one about specific issues, really listening rather than telling people what to do. And so, I've been coaching as well as group training, coaching for the last 15 years, one-to-one. And it was really very much, as I said, no criticism of this framework, but it is very prescriptive down, as I just said, to like observing them and kind of marking them on these markers. But I very quickly realised, well, people are all different and they react in different ways. They need different things. Like it's not a, one size fits all. It's not a framework that we can just apply to everyone and say, well, if you just do these things, these 15 markers, you're going to be a great leader. We have very different types of leaders, don't we, even in the same sector. And So it was much more kind of my experience since then of working one to one with people and doing leadership coaching that then I really kind of thought, actually, this isn't how I want to teach it or tell people, that this is, just do this and you'll become a great leader.
Yeah. So how have you, so kind of what's your, yeah, so how have you adapted, or how have you adapted,
Yeah.
in order to kind of be more inclusive in that way?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely the one-to-one coaching, I mean, that's a lot easier because it
Sure.
is just that person, right? But I still do.
So actually, just to pause on that one, I guess to connect with this framework. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like the framework was just really rigid, and in terms of it was the way it was meant to be applied is just is more of that kind of telling. Is that right? Where like somebody says, I have a problem, and you're just like, well, according to line 15 on chart 12, it says you need to up your score of this by 3. So go do that, and then it'll be fixed.
I mean, yeah, that's
and
the
it's
extreme
like
version. I hope I never did that, but that, as I said, that's,
sure. I'm not sure. Yeah.
But that's why I'm saying, like, that's when people were asking me, I was like, oh, like this. That's why I took the coaching diploma, because I was like, I don't feel like I can help people on that one-to-one, like, specific basis. Like, this is, it was a great starting point, and particularly people in technical industries. Like, I'd had all that, I'd started studying psychology when I was 17, and these were, much older than me in a lot of cases, but they'd never, and I still get this now. People go, oh, I didn't know this. Like, how do you know? I'm like, because I've been studying it for the last, however many years. But they've been, in a very technical mindset, and they've never been taught this stuff, right? So it's a great framework as a good starting point of, these are the kind of things that, would make you a better leader or team player or communicator. But as I said, like, that kind of, the one-to-one is certainly a lot easier to then adapt to that person. But even in my group training, I've changed, like, I don't use this at all now, this framework. So the kind of stuff I do now, said much more based on experience and leadership coaching. I also absolutely love Brene Brown and all the stuff that she talks about in terms of vulnerability and courage. So my last workshop was much more around, like, courageous leadership. And I guess the other big thing that's changed this last year, which is kind of a new thing, again, in the space sector, it's very male dominated. So I always say, like, most of the people I've trained and coached have been men. This last year, I set up my own program, which was for mid-career professionals, to get this kind of leadership, teamwork, communication training. And it just so happened, maybe because I'm a woman, that people, that it was only women that joined. Absolutely fine. But then the kind of stuff that we've been talking about in the last year is just very different. And I'm not like stereotyping and saying that, oh, men lead like this and women lead like this. I'm absolutely not doing that. But it's just like, it was just a very, like, new kind of leadership. Like, this just didn't work for them and their situations and how they wanted to, be a leader. So it was just a very, iterative process.
Yeah. Do you have any? That's interesting. Because it's so interesting. I keep using that word about this idea that, like, people are people, but and we're all the same, but we're all different. And so much of the specifics really matter. The context matters. And I think that's a great example. Are there any particular things that stood out to you that surprised you about when you wound up with kind of this all women group, that what was different?
Yeah.
How were the conversations different?
Yeah, I guess, and again, it's the context. It's not just the gender thing. Like, if you're an astronaut in space and ground control tell you, push this button, do this, do that, like, you're going to do it, right? Whereas down on Earth, like, we don't have that same pressure. We don't have that same kind of authority, if that's the right word. So it was much more about kind of getting people on board, like, getting that kind of buy-in. It wasn't automatic. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, the astronauts, it's an automatic buy-in. They're going to do the ground control.
Sure.
Kind of, that's what's in the procedure. That's what they're being told. Whereas down on Earth, I don't know, but in the organizations I've worked with, like, you have to get that buy-in. Like, people have to respect you as a leader. You have to earn their trust. And, I just found, even with the women, as I said, I'm not generalizing, they are very different.
Yeah.
They're very different leaders. Some of them probably lead more traditionally like men, and some of them definitely don't. Like, so it was very much
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, we've got to, this framework doesn't fit everyone. We've got to try something new. So,
Yeah.
and I guess also in the program, as I said, it's a lot more. It's not just me that's like telling them. It's very interactive, very coaching style, and getting their experience as well as mine. So.
So since you primarily work in the space world with these people who are highly technical, like you said, I think when I talk with folks, I just spent a year writing a book and talking to people about more generally with engineers. I'd be asking this question of like, what's the hardest part about going from engineer to people manager? Like what's that big challenge? With the people that you work with, what are you seeing? What have you seen as the primary challenges that people have to get over when they're going from that individual contributor, that technical contributor, I've spent my whole life focused on solving these problems, into more of a people leader role?
I mean, I've seen that throughout my whole career. I think that's a really good point. Like, so even back before I joined the European Space Agency, when I was a teacher in a high school, was my very first job. And we would have like the very best teachers would then become head of department. And I always thought, like, you're taking them out. Like, I'm not saying it's a tech, but you're taking them out of that very specialist role that they're really, really good at. And now they're head of department. So they're not doing all the stuff they're really good at, or not as much as they were. And you're expecting them to be these wonderful leaders and have this team and everything else. So like, it's not even a technical space thing. It happens, I think, across many organizations. So I've forgotten your question.
Just what is that challenge like? And specific, I guess, or what have you seen in your world? Like, I guess specifically in the space world, like what are you seeing now? What are the most common challenges that people have when they're with leadership, with people skills?
That they're never taught it. Like that they, the people that I teach, like they've, unless you go, like you said, on a MBA or a leadership, most of them that I speak to have never been taught it. It's just because they've been good at their job and they get put into it. So as I said to you earlier, like they're always surprised, why didn't I know this kind of thing? And they quite self-critical as well. And I keep saying, like, why would you know this? I mean, even doing like personality profiling, I was quite against doing it and labeling people, but my goodness, it's really like insightful for them because they've never done it before. So they're just finding out all this stuff. So I'd say that's like a big hurdle. And before they even start then trying to lead and manage other people, it's kind of figuring out themselves. One of the first modules we do on my program is self-awareness. Before they even start on the external stuff and communicating with other people and leading other people and building teams, it's self-awareness and self-management. So I'd say that's the biggest, or at least the first challenge to overcome.
That makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's easy, whether it's the people like us who like are teaching this stuff, or even people more generally in like talent development or the human resources side of organizations, generally have spent a little bit more time thinking about this kind of stuff, getting exposed to this kind of stuff. And so it can be easy to forget that there's all these other people who have just never seen these things. And very often, I agree with you. Like, I think when it comes to things like personality assessments, there's lots of critiques of them. They have lots of challenges, but most of those critiques they're in the details. They're in the weeds. Like, and at like a high level, there's still really great things to do, and they can give you lots of information as long as you don't forget that, the map is not the territory. Yeah. This thing isn't you. It's not defining you. It's just some data points that can be interesting.
Yeah. That's what I always say to them. It's just information. And actually, like the first session, they have their 15-page report, and the very next like coaching session, I say to them, like, you tell me everything that you don't agree with and we'll go from there.
Ooh,
like,
I love it.
Is this a blind spot, or is this, and actually that's the best kind of way because, I just think like it's that self-awareness, isn't it? And most of the time they're like, they don't agree with it because they don't like it. But actually, when they start talking about it, it's like, actually, I do that, or I don't do that very well. So
that's a really interesting technique to kind of get through some of that friction, I suppose. Yeah. How often with the particular cohort that you've kind of worked with throughout, Do you run into that? Like you mentioned, there's a little bit of this, like, how did I not know this? And some of that can be self-critical, which then creates, it can create kind of a defensive response. Do you see that often, and how do you bring people in?
Yeah, I mean, with that one in particular, I actually always start it by saying that I was quite critical of these personality profiling, because I've seen it done really, I mean, you can just go on the internet for free and find out all this stuff, can't you? And I've seen it done really badly, where people kind of, they get their type or their label and they're like, well, that's me, I can't possibly do X, Y, and Z because I'm the creator, like I'm not going to finish this or do the processes or anything. And so I've seen it done, like, well, not, it's not, but people kind of react to it like that. So I always start this with, I was very critical of them as well, but actually it's really useful if, for self-awareness, and if it's done right. And you can disagree with it, I'm not trying to label you, and it's just about, this is where you are, and you can actually challenge yourself and do some of these other things that may not be in your comfort zone. So I think that helps. But I don't know about you, actually, Matt. I've had this like all the way through training, like teaching soft skills to very technical people. Like the very first and most important thing is just getting their buy-in, right? Like, why are we even teaching this? I always have, whenever I go into a new audience, this image in my head of this very experienced, very qualified, intelligent, technical person or astronaut, like sat there with their arms crossed, like, why are you here, psychologist, telling me? So it's always, for me, I mean, especially with the human factors background, like, these are the, it's not just a nice to have. This is really important. This is a safety aspect, actually. So I think that helps too.
Well, and I wonder if this is kind of something that's changing too, generationally. I've been surprised at, especially more recently, just like how little, like, people are very open and accepting and excited and kind of realize that this stuff is important, even if they haven't studied it before. And like, as a very specific example, one of the first things I teach or talk a lot about is trust and personal connection. And I do a lot of these podcasts with founders, people who have founded space companies, and the number of times trust comes up from them in the conversation surprises me. It's very often one of the first things, and I think it could be, there's certainly a bias there of who, like, the people who are willing to come on a podcast like this are certainly more likely to be interested in talking about these kinds of things. So it's not a representative sample by any means. But generally, even when I'm doing workshops and stuff like that, I feel like there's, I kind of think there's kind of a shift that you could kind of see with the whole zeitgeist of culture, of thinking about psychology, human connection, human factors, as like treating it as a more important thing.
Definitely,
I could see that being something that's going on.
And I'd say, so my dad's in his 60s. He has his pilot's license, and I think he was slightly shocked and horrified when 2 out of his 3 daughters studied psychology at university. It was a very new subject back then, and so I think he kind of was a little bit worried. But then once I got into the human factors side and could relate it to like his world, like, now we have,
this is
now we have some really good conversations about it. So again, like I've had that practice, and I totally
that's funny.
get it.
Going back to kind of the original definition of human factors, like, it's people to things. Now we're talking about things still. Great, this is good.
But now, whenever unfortunately an aviation accident or something happens in the world, then he's the first one to say, "It's human factors here." So he's totally on board. So if I can convince him, then I can.
I think especially in aerospace and the space world in particular, I think in terms of convincing people that this stuff is important, the thing we have behind us, from the aviation world is, the vast majority of accidents do come down to human factors. Absolutely. And then in the space world in particular, both the shuttle accidents everything comes back to leadership and culture. Like that's what did it. And so there's just no denying how essential this kind of stuff is.
And I love it when, so I ran a leadership workshop 2 weeks ago, and I didn't even use like the case studies of Challenger and Columbia. And there was someone sat there and we were talking about psychological safety and speaking up. And I wasn't even teaching it in a kind of human factors theory kind of way. And he was like, oh, that's just like with the Challenger. And he was then telling me, because he was familiar with it. And I was just like, yes, I didn't even need to.
They made the connection. That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, this has been a really great discussion, Susan. What's the best way for people to find you if they're interested?
Connect with me on LinkedIn is Susan Charlesworth, or website is Charlesworth Human Performance. So I have a newsletter every Friday, which is mainly lots of events and fun things that I go to in the UK space sector, but also some little nuggets and in there of tips and advice. So yeah, I guess that's the best way. Excellent.
Well, this has been really great. I got to come out to do some. You'll have to show me to some space events out in the UK and Europe, because I definitely haven't been out there a whole ton. But this is really interesting. I think it's because I think especially in these technical worlds, we're really drawn to these highly technical breakdowns of this is what leadership is, this is what human performance is. But just like with the personality assessments, you got to realize like the map is not the territory. This is interesting, but like when it comes to making that leap to that individual, okay, what am I going to do in this situation? It can take a little bit more. It takes a little bit more translating, a little bit different of a understanding in different language. So this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a really interesting conversation for me too.
Thank you so much for listening in on the conversation. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. If you are a manager yourself and you're looking for more insight onto how to better lead your team, please make sure to check out some of our other amazing episodes. If you are responsible for developing leaders in your organization and you're struggling to make programs that actually change behavior and actually impact the business, please reach out so we can figure out how to make your organization better every day. Drop me a line using matt@bettereverydaystudios.com. I look forward to the conversation.